Okay, yeah, so we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sue Fasciani. I am marketing manager with Tiger Home and Building Inspections. So glad you could join us for our presentation on what to expect when we're inspecting. I'm here today with Kara Golden. She's Director of Marketing. Her and I work together throughout the state of Connecticut on the marketing team. So if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out to us. I'm also here with Bill Rourke. He is going to be doing our presentation today and is general manager of Tiger Group, as well as he is a licensed home inspector and going back to 1997. So I've been doing it a long time, Bill. Bill holds a supervisory pest control license for wood destroying insects. He's a member of the American Society of Home Inspectors and is also nationally certified for radon testing. Before Bill joined Tiger Group, he was involved in commercial and residential construction as a general contractor, owner, and property manager. As of to date, Bill has performed over 8,500 home inspections and really has a vast experience and knowledge that he brings to his clients at the home inspections and at today's presentation. So before we get started, I want to just tell you a little bit about Tiger Group, and that is we are a family-owned business since 1992, and we've been performing commercial and residential inspections throughout the state of Connecticut 7 days a week. Also, we do inspections that border the towns of New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. We do keep our office open 7 days a week. We know you're out there working. And we want to make sure we're available for questions as well as scheduling those home inspections for your clients. We do have 22 home inspectors. They are all licensed with either the supervisory or O, which is operator's license for wood destroying insects. And we're able to include that report for free with our residential home inspections. We have an environmental staff. They are all certified to set up those electronic monitors for radon. And we also do water testing, and they're all trained to do that as well. Our mold division has a manager and a couple of inspectors that are trained for mold assessments and testing. And out of our 22 inspectors, many of them have specialties such as 203K, antique homes, new construction, and more. So keep that in mind when your clients are asking you those questions. Before we move on to the presentation and I turn this over to Bill, I just want to let you know that we are going to be answering questions through the chat. So Kara will monitor those. Just send those in as you think of your questions. And also try to keep your mic on mute. Otherwise, we'll probably mute you for a little while, and then we will be raffling off the Panera gift card at the end. So all set. Bill, take it away with the agenda.
Thanks, Sue. Good afternoon, everyone. As Sue had mentioned, my name is Bill Rourke, and we do encourage any of the questions that you have today. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you. Today, we're going to talk about very briefly what we've been doing over the last year with respect to COVID. Talk about the home inspection with respect to defining an inspection for you. Talking a little bit about the standards of practice, what might be included in that, how to prepare for, and some hints on good prospects for selecting home inspection companies. With regard to COVID-19 procedures, we continue to follow the CT Realtor guidelines and those from the CDC where they've been provided. Obviously, wherever possible, we're trying to continue to maintain our distance until we all get through this with regard to vaccinations and all that good stuff. And I expect we'll probably be continuing to have this same conversation for the next several months, if not longer. As just a general guideline, all of our inspectors have all the personal protective equipment that they need with respect to
Sorry, Bill, I accidentally muted you.
I got muted somehow.
I'm sorry.
This is fine. So we know it works. So anyhow, when clients or yourself call our office, you can expect that there will be a little bit of a conversation about that. All of our inspectors understand that it's very important to come to work healthy, to sanitize themselves prior to the arrival on the job site, and of course, upon leaving the job site as well. For some reason, where'd my little thing go here? Oh, there it is. Okay, so why do clients need home inspections? Well, there's a variety of reasons, not the least of which would be so that they can have a better understanding of what they are purchasing. Critically important, especially now, the conversations I'm having with people on a regular basis when they show up for the home inspection is, boy, I've only been in this house for 15 minutes. So anything you can tell me is going to be really helpful. And obviously more so than that may have been the case just a year ago. Obviously understanding how the systems in the building operate. And interact with each other. We would talk about some general maintenance conditions and also help them understand about the types of things that they may be needing to think about for future upgrades. Listen, everybody has their own idea of what perfection for their house is. And that obviously means a little bit something different to all of us. The idea is that they go into this with a good understanding of what it is that they're purchasing. And that we're playing our role in helping to manage that client conversation on site. So with respect to the home inspection, by definition, our inspections in the state of Connecticut are following the standards that have been put forth by the state of Connecticut, which were adopted from the ASHI standards. ASHI is an acronym for the American Society of Home Inspectors, a professional organization that some inspectors subscribe to. Obviously, we are conducting a visual examination. Notice that it talks about readily accessible areas. One of the things that you will receive today as part of this presentation at the end is a set of standards for the state of Connecticut. And in that set of standards, there is a glossary that talks about those things like readily accessible areas, which is really important that clients understand because we aren't able to do certain things. I mean, we can tell them what we can see. We can't tell them what we can't see, is what it comes down to. And then obviously we are describing the conditions as they are on the day of the inspection. We do try to anticipate, what may happen in the future as part of a normal aging process for a component or a system. But we are really looking at what the conditions are at this point in time for the inspection. We are regulated just as you are by the Department of Consumer Protection. The goal of the standards is to provide a minimum and uniform standard. So notice it says minimum. You can always do more, right? It's kind of like the building code. The building code defines what it is that you will do as a minimum to build a house. The inspection standards define what it is as a minimum that you will do for an inspection. Those standards are required to be provided to a client at the time of the inspection. At Tiger Group, we do send those to our clients in advance so they have an opportunity to look at those. And just as your realtor licensing requires, we have a code of ethics to follow. All of that information will be included in the packet that you'll receive after this seminar today. So we're here to provide some education for these folks, help them understand how these systems interact. What's the yin and the yang between the air conditioning and the heating system, for example. Talk about where all the controls are. If they have a leak in the house, what are they going to do? That type of thing. Super important for these folks to understand. We're going to talk about things that are significantly deficient. So again, that's going to go back to that glossary of terms. The state defines what is significantly deficient or at the end of its useful life. And those are really important criteria for us to pass along to our clients. Help them understand what's normal in a house. What's normal in a 2015 house is going to be different than what's normal in a 1815 house, for example. So we have to be able to help them put things into perspective. And then talk about some of the maintenance type things that they should anticipate. When we're doing the home inspection, we're going to look at it from top to bottom or bottom to top, depending upon where you start. But we're going to talk about the foundation. We'll look at all the framing conditions, and we'll describe the methods that are used to access and inspect these areas. These are some of the things that may be a little remarkable when you look at it and say, why did the home inspector say this, or why did the home inspector say that, or why did they report this particular way? The state standards do prescribe what we will tell people and how we will tell them. It says in the standards, if I'm inspecting a roof, for example, how did I inspect that roof? Did I do it from the ground? Did I do it from a ladder? Was I on the roof? And then I'm required to describe the materials that are in there. So all of those things are all spelled out for us in the standards. It will speak to all of the exterior components which are listed on here. We're going to talk about all the siding, the trim on the building, any of the roof covering or chimneys, porches, deck additions, that type of thing, and anything that's related to the house. So for example, the site drainage as it relates to the house. Now, you may, for example, have a site drainage issue that doesn't affect the house. Well, that may or may not necessarily be important for the home inspection purposes. But if it's a situation where the drainage is a reverse grade for situation, for example, and it's creating a problem for the house, then certainly we would speak to that. Same would be true for a retaining wall. You may have a retaining wall on the property that really doesn't have anything to do with the house, for example. With respect to the systems and components within the house, we're going to talk about the supply and distribution system. Again, we are required to define some of these things for clients. So what type of water supply system do we have, for example, and waste disposal system? The types of materials that are in the building will be reported as well, as would be the type of water heating equipment, any fuel storage or distribution system. So for example, are we a natural gas system? Do we have oil tanks? Do we have above ground tanks, below ground tanks, that type of thing. Talks about sump pumps and systems, and obviously we would have as detailed a conversation as we can about that. And also notice it says to describe the on-site well components. It's interesting because the state really tells us what we're going to inspect versus what we're going to describe. And when it comes to the well equipment system, it really doesn't talk about inspection. It talks about a description on there. So we have to kind of wade through some of these conversations with our clients. With respect to the electrical systems, we're basically going to start from the exterior and go right through the building and figure out, okay, from our service entry down to our last switch or receptacle, how do we go through and look at those systems? Notice it says representative number of fixtures or switches, outlets, and GFCIs in the house. So the standard acknowledges the fact that we may not be able to get to everything in the building. Rest assured, we're going to try to get to whatever we can, but we are inspectors, we're not movers. So if there are things that are in the way, then we're going to talk about that with the client and help them understand what the limitations of what we may or may not be able to do. Also, it speaks to smoke detectors. The standard is very specific with regard to smoke and CO detectors and understands and acknowledges the fact that we really can't verify if these systems are functional. Rather, we're required to identify the presence or absence of them. And also, with respect to ground fault interrupter circuits, we're required to state whether they're present or absent in areas that we would expect them to be, which would be areas near water. So think exterior of the building, garage, basement, kitchen, bathroom locations, that type of thing. With respect to the heating and cooling equipment, it talks about installed equipment. So there, for example, we wouldn't be looking at uninstalled equipment, which might be a space heater. I was in a house the other day, it had a plug-in electric fireplace in the house. So that's not an installed system. That's a portable system, which somebody could just pick up and take with them. So that kind of begs a conversation on site as to, okay, well, what are we doing with this? Is this staying? Would you like me to look at it, not look at it? That type of thing. With respect to cooling systems, it speaks to central and through wall systems. So that excludes a window installed air conditioner, for example. So we're really kind of parsing that conversation so that people understand what we're doing and not doing. It speaks about vents, flues, and chimneys, and then it goes on to say that we're not required to inspect the interior of flues and chimneys that are not readily accessible. So the standard acknowledges that we may have some limitations, or there may be some specialized procedures or equipment that would be involved in being able to fully assess that. And we would have that conversation with a client on site. it speaks to the adequacy, distribution, and balance of systems in a house. I was yesterday in a condominium, a townhouse, and we were down on the first floor, and I turned on the heat, and it was 67 degrees at the thermostat. And we went upstairs, and it was about 75 degrees up there. And I'm sure you've experienced that yourself, where you get into certain types of building styles where you're not going to have a balance throughout the house. So we had some conversations about what does that mean to the occupants of the house and their comfort levels, and what are some of the strategies that they might employ to make adjustments to that while they're living in the building. So those are all really important conversations to have with clients. And then we're also required to describe the energy source. So is it natural gas? Is it oil? Is it electric? That type of thing. It may seem somewhat redundant to have some of these conversations, but they are part of the standard, and therefore we do need to have them with the clients so that they understand what we're doing and what we're not doing. With respect to insulation and ventilation, it speaks to describing the type of insulation that we're using in the building. Goes on to say to identify vapor retarders, and then it tells us that we're not required to move insulation. Sometimes the standards are at odds with each other, and it makes it a little confusing for clients who may be reading the standards. So again, we need to kind of have those conversations and help them understand what exactly the intent of the standard is. Talks about ventilation, and then we're required to look for insulation and ventilation conditions in any unfinished areas, which would be listed here as the basement, attic, and crawl space locations. With respect to the interior locations, we're going through the rooms. We're looking at windows, doors, outlets, walls, ceilings, floors, going through the individual rooms, and then, of course, the bathrooms and kitchens, and those being rooms that have additional components in it. So water fixtures or appliances, that type of thing. With respect to the appliances, it talks about the fact that the appliances are beyond the scope of the inspection, which they are. Again, we'll try to do whatever we can. So we do inspect installed appliances such that those things that are bolted to the building. So think of a dishwasher, think of a disposer, that type of thing, where we're able to do that. Laundry equipment, for example, refrigerators are things that really aren't necessarily attached to the building. So the standard recognizes that those may not be systems that stay with the house, and they may be leaving. So, but again, a conversation we can have on site, excuse me. Fireplaces, to the degree that we can inspect a fireplace. So obviously we're able to look at the hearth face, the hearth extension, the firebox, the damper, and part of the smoke chamber. And that's about it. You're not necessarily going to be able to see too far up into the liner assembly. And that's really where our job stops, and that of a chimney sweep would begin, for example. So we would have that conversation with clients. And then the solid fuel appliances, wood, pellet, and then of course gas appliances. We don't have a lot of kerosene systems, but that would be another fuel that could be part of this conversation as well. Again, talks about the accessibility on here, and then the requirement, or not required, I should say, to ignite or determine draft or move appliances. Very frequently, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, you'll go into a house where a gas appliance, for example, or maybe a pellet stove is not in operation. As inspectors, we're going to inspect it as it sits. We're not going to light that necessarily. If it's something that is a simple remote control, for example, we'll absolutely do that. But systems that are shut down, we have to approach those with caution. We have to remember we're in an unfamiliar environment here, and we don't know why that gas valve is shut off for that appliance, for example. So we're not going to take a risk of starting something and then perhaps having a problem on site. So we're going to report that condition as we find it. We're going to have a client conversation so that they understand what the limitations of what we can and cannot do. So those are the basic things for the home inspection. When we get to the wood boring insect inspection on here, you'll find that this is not uniform. The wood boring insect inspection is not part of a home inspection. It's not covered by the home inspection standards. it's covered by a separate set of standards, and Sue alluded to this earlier. So for purposes of our conversation, a wood boring insect is going to be a termite, a carpenter ant, a carpenter bee, or a powder post beetle. Those are categorized as reinfesting insects. The oversight for that licensing wise is going to be in the state of Connecticut, a supervisory license. The standard essentially is the same whether you're an individual doing this as part of a home inspection, or if you're doing it as a pest control operator working for a pest control company. The licensing standard is going to be the same. You're going to have a supervisor license, and then you're going to have an operator license. The operators are allowed to do the inspection. They're not necessarily allowed to apply chemicals, and that's the way that the program is set up in the state of Connecticut. So you'll find that some home inspection companies do not do wood boring insect inspections. Rather, they don't do them at all, or they may have a half measure where they bring a pest control operator, a licensed pest control operator with them to do the inspection, or they may just simply say, I'll tell you what I can see, but if I don't see anything, then that's the answer. We've made a decision as an organization that we are inspecting the house anyhow. We are required to know what the structure looks like and determine its condition. So it kind of makes sense to do the wood boring insect inspection as part of that overall inspection. The other question would be, is it a requirement for a loan? Well, we don't know the answer to that. Only you and your client would know the answer to that. And then also the question that you'd want to ask is it included in the inspection fee? Because again, it's not covered by the home inspection standards, so it may or may not be. So the important parts of the conversation here are that we explain to the client what it is that we're finding, what it means to them, and then giving them some direction with regard to does this particular condition require monitoring? Does it require some action on their part? Is it, functionally at the end of its life or some other way deficient? Those would be important things that we would need to go through with them. We're going to talk about, simple maintenance things, and we will try to segregate those conversations for clients. And then when it's warranted, we're going to make recommendations for further evaluation. So when does that come into play? In a lot of people's opinion, too often it comes into play, and I'm kind of on the same table with that. So think of the example I gave you about the fireplace. So I can tell you what the exterior fireplace looks like. I can tell you what the exterior of the chimney looks like. I can tell you what the base of the chimney looks like. I can tell you about the fireplace, the firebox, the damper assembly. But there's a whole big part of the inside of that chimney that I can't tell you anything about. So now I'm looking for clues, right? I'm going to look for some signs that there may be something happening inside that chimney. And that may be readily apparent from the exterior, where I may see some cracks or other type of deterioration. Or perhaps in the fireplace when I open up the damper, maybe there's level of deterioration or something else that's happening in there. Those would be the times, and we would say legitimately, listen, you need to get somebody else out here to take a look at this and figure out what may be happening at these areas that are not readily accessible at this point. So we've gone through a few things here, and Kara, do we have any questions?
We do. Thanks, Bill. The first question goes back to the roof section, and it was, do you go up on the roof or just look from the ground? So if you could just talk a little bit about Tiger and how we inspect roofs.
Sure. So our goal as inspectors in our organization is to get on every roof that we can get on safely. So what does that mean? Well, pitch, the angle of the roof, the overall height of the roof are going to play a role in that. The condition of the roofing is going to play a role in that. So what I mean by that is it an older roof that has a lot of vegetation growth on it? Is it an older roof that's already showing signs of distress and deterioration that walking on it's going to create more problems for it? And also weather conditions. So if it's wet, for example, or if it's frozen, or if it had a dusting of snow on it like it had this morning at my house. Those are all factors that we have to look at. We have made a decision that certainly any roof that we can't get onto, we will get up to wherever possible. So put a ladder up to it at several points around the outside of the building. Look at it from different vantage points. Remember, the exterior of the roof is only one surface of the roof. We're also looking for clues up in the attic with regard to the structure or potential leak issues. And we're looking in the building itself. I was at a house the other day that had ice dams on it. If you've ever seen ice dams staining, you don't need to be on a roof to see that. You can see it from the ground. It's all these brown stains that are coming down the side of the building. Looks like somebody kind of washed the house with dirt. So there's a lot of ways to look at a roof, but we will get on a roof whenever we can. We will get up to a roof whenever we can, and we will describe the limitations of what we're doing whenever possible. Roofs are not made to be walked on, folks. You know, you only walk on a roof when you need to. And if there's a roof that I can't see from the ground, but I can get to with a ladder, then I will get on that roof because I need to be able to see that, to touch it, to feel it, to be able to evaluate it. But walking on a roof is not the only way to evaluate a roof. And we need to just kind of take this complete view of that. But that's a great question. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. So another question, does the seller who may have insights into certain aspects of the home ever attend the inspection?
So we never say never, right? We really know what we're walking into when we show up. That's the exciting part of our job. Every day is a new adventure when we show up at the door. Some days we're welcome and some days we're not so welcome, but most of the time we're welcome. So yeah, I mean, listen, that's I guess something that would be worked out between the parties. We don't get to tell people what to do in their house. We go in there as guests and we conduct ourselves as such. So yeah, I don't really have an answer for that question. I guess they're gonna do what they're gonna do, and you know, we're not gonna do anything to create a problem. Put it that way. I have over the years had many sellers that attended inspections. I've had some that were very involved in the inspection. I've learned to manage those conversations pretty well over the years. And, you know, if we need to have a delicate conversation, we will have it out of earshot of the seller. I think that's probably the most important part of the conversation.
Thank you. And I'll just add to that. I mean, most commonly the sellers are not home, or either that or they're not participating in the inspection. And it really is the buyer's time with you as the buyer's agent there in the house with the inspector for a few hours to really get a feel for it. So although they might have some insights and maybe the buyer and seller have a very good relationship, typically they're not going to be involved in these conversations during inspection time, is my understanding. Okay, this is a good one for you, Bill. Please comment on building codes and permits.
So as you may or may not know, home inspection is not a code inspection. They are completely separate activities. The building code requires a building official to weigh in on whether or not it complies with the building code. The building code changes every 3 years, or as may be updated or adapted by the state of Connecticut, as far as that goes. So we're really doing a performance inspection. That's really what we're here for. We're here to determine how is this particular system or component performing. Does it appear to be installed reasonably? I got a photo sent over from one of our inspectors this morning asking me about a particular wiring configuration. And it was clear to me that the photo that he sent me was of an installation that was wired before the advent of building codes in the state of Connecticut. So it wasn't really something that you could apply a code conversation to, but you could talk about performance. And performance, least of which being safety, right? So that's really what we're looking at is, you know, is this performing as the installer had intended it to? And is it a safe installation? So those are the things that we're looking at. What was the other part of the question, Kara?
It was just building codes and permits, which I think.
Oh, permits, yes. So permits, So, there's a list that the state of Connecticut has in its amendments of those items that are excluded from permit. You can go on to the state building officials website and download that list, which is not a bad idea to have. But essentially anything structural and mechanical in a building is going to require a permit. So the time that for us that would come up as a conversation is if we are in a house where it's clear to us that something has been improved recently. We would, as just kind of an awareness conversation, ask the question, do you know if a permit has been issued for this? And if it's been issued, has it been closed? And that's about as far as we're going to be able to get into that conversation. So again, if we have questions about the installation, we're going to fall back on our home inspection standards, which are performance and safety, not so much as far as the permitting or code part of the conversation.
Okay, and just to relate to that, Kimberly had a follow-up. Is that list is statewide?
It is, yes. The building code for residential construction is the IRC, International Residential Code. And I think it's section 105 of the code, actually. And if you just go on the state building officials website, you can download that. And that is statewide.
And our last question for this segment is, do you inspect the HVAC or do you bring in an outside company?
Yeah, great question. So all of our inspectors are trained to inspect all the systems that we do. We don't bring in any contractors for the home inspection part of the activity. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the subcontractor relationships that we would talk about for environmental stuff, but for the home inspection, we do all of our inspections.
Great. Thanks, Bill. You can continue on.
Great. Okay. So with respect to the systems in the building, access is a big part of it, right? I mentioned earlier, we're not movers, we're inspectors. We're not really supposed to be moving stuff for people. We don't want to break anything, number one. It's invasive, number two. So I think the important part of the conversation from, the transaction management part of it, which is what you folks do, is making sure that there's a conversation in advance of, the home inspection scheduled for XYZ. And, we want to make sure that there's access. I noticed when we walked through the house the other day that there was a bunch of stuff, in front of the heating system, for example. Can we get that moved so that the inspector will get access to it? So yeah, heating systems, any system, right? We need to have access to that. Having anything in operation that's possible. So this references gas pilots lit for, stoves, that type of thing. Any perimeter access areas that can be opened up, fantastic. So we can see the structure, so we can do a good job doing that wood boring insect inspection. The attic entry, I was in a house yesterday, it's got a built-in shelving unit over the front of the attic access, which was in a condo. I don't think I could have fit it anyhow, but I could have gotten up to there. But yeah, any of those types of things we want to be able to get into. Crawl spaces. I don't know if you have a crawl space in your house, but ask yourself when the last time you were in it. Nobody goes in these places. There's always all kinds of interesting stuff in there. And then, tenant type situations, perhaps, where multifamily houses, do we have access to all these things? About a shed out in the backyard. Some people want to look at a shed. Maybe it's got a lock on it. Those would be important things to take a look at too. And then, excuse me, seasonal type situations. What are we going to be able to do? Well, as you probably already know, we're not going to be able to run air conditioners until probably the end of April, depending upon how the temperatures keep going. Irrigation systems, maybe the end of March, depending upon when they get them started up. And same thing would be true for pools. With respect to the snow covered areas, not a standard per se, but a company policy where we do offer a free return to look at any snow covered areas for clients. And we'll have that conversation with them on site and we'll report our requirements to return. We're happy to go back and do a return visit for snow covered areas, provided that somebody calls us and lets us know when it's free of snow. I will tell you that I got a call the other day from a client who drove by a house, a beautiful house, pretty large house too. And they drove by and said, there's no snow on the roof, so you can go back out and check it. And what we asked for is that phone call and to give us 2-3 days to be able to get out there, because we're not going to schedule that activity. We're just going to, work that into our day-to-day activities. And I got back out to the property, and yes, the front roof was free of snow. The rear roof had about 1 inch of ice on it and a few inches of snow still. Unfortunately, we can't, as an organization, just continue to make return visits to things. So we do ask people that they check it, because we're happy to go back there and do it, but we can't make multiple visits back there. Especially now, what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks, folks. We're just going to be as busy as all get out, and we're just not going to be able to schedule those things. So, the first time is the best time for us to get back out there. So with regard to limitations, and there are limitations, as we just kind of touched on, anything that is not readily accessible, we're going to have some level of limitations to it. We're not going to do any destructive probing or dismantling. We don't own the house. The client that may be buying the house typically doesn't own the house. So we can't go in there and, create physical damage to the building on there. We will probe framing systems where we suspect that there may be some deterioration as part of our wood boring insect inspection, which any pest control operator would do. As we've talked about, we're not going to be able to move things. We can't really tell people what's happening inside a wall. We'll do our level best to help them understand what they may expect to find in there, but we can't see through walls. So obviously we're not going to be able to tell them a whole lot about that, for example. Entering areas that are unsafe. So I had an inspection the other day, and the agent said, "Hey, Bill, good news. There's a big crawl space for you to get into." I'm like, fantastic. I love crawl spaces. So I was all ready to go out and get my respirator and my Tyvek suit. And I said, let me just take a look in there first and see what we're dealing with. Well, it was an old house, and it was an addition off of an old house that had a stone foundation, and the access that they had made was about the size of a basement window that was about 5 feet off the ground, and the floor inside the crawl space was about 4 feet off the ground. So as you can tell by looking at me, I'm not a young man. There's going to be limitations as to what I can do in there. In addition to that, there was a 4-inch sewer pipe going right across the front of the opening that would have otherwise allowed access. And then about 7 decades worth of construction debris, including broken glass from windows that was in there, mold on the floor, water, and hanging electrical wires. I don't need to tell you, I didn't have to go too far to have that conversation and describe to people what I'm going to be able to do and not able to do. And we will document all those conditions, because that's what we're there for. But, we obviously are not going to put ourselves in harm's way. And we wouldn't expect anybody else to either. And then the other part of it is life expectancy. We will, again, do our very best to help people understand the life expectancy that they can anticipate based on averages. So for example, I can tell you that if your roof is somewhere in the 20-year-old neighborhood, that roof is beyond midlife at this point in time, and probably closer to the end of its life than it is the beginning of it. And we can help them understand those types of things, but I don't know, as you don't know, when the roof is going to start leaking, for example. We just touched on the code conversation. We are obviously not providing any type of insurance policy or warranties. We're doing a visual inspection based upon our experience and opinion. And we're not going to talk a lot about cosmetic conditions. We may mention things casually to people that may not be readily apparent to them. But you're not going to see in our reports that there's a stain on the carpet, for example. That's just not part of what home inspection is. And then again, in keeping with the limitations part of it, think about anything that might be underground. We're not going to be able to tell them a whole lot about that. Any environmental conditions, well, those are going to be things that would be part of environmental testing. And then, of course, general pests. You noticed, I think this is a groundhog photo here. I have one underneath my rear porch in case anybody's looking for one. He showed up yesterday. I'll have to deal with that soon, evidently. In the report, we will, as we talked about, provide the wood boring insect report. We will differentiate between what would be a common maintenance item and those things that might be more significant. We will help people understand that when we have a conversation about something that we're talking about an upgrade, such as a ground fault protected outlet in a 1960 house. It wasn't a requirement when the house was built. So it's an upgrade for safety. And obviously those are things that we should have conversations about. The further evaluation, as we touched on, anything that's inaccessible, we will have, just as we're having here now, a conversation throughout the inspection to help people understand, see it, touch it, feel it, read it. It's really the best way to be. And then at the end of the inspection, we have what we call a kitchen table summary, where we're going to kind of try and gather everybody that's present and talk about what are the important things that you're going to want to deal with as part of your next steps. There is no standard for written reporting formats, so you will find some differences in there. Our report is really best described as a combination narrative and checklist summary report, which we find works quite well. We do have an agreement and a statement for clients so that they understand the scope of what we're doing and what they did order for inspections and or tests. And as I mentioned, we do have a summary and we provide photos within the report. Our report product is confidential. This is an example of our report here. Looks like garage page here. The top of my page is cut off, but that's what it seems to be. And so you'll see on the left-hand side here, the system or component that we're looking at, our general rating system, which is described in the beginning of our report, and then the narrative of the conditions or findings in there. It's a pretty simple read for clients. So that concludes this part of the section. Do we have any questions, Kara?
We do. The first question is, if you cannot inspect a pool, do you typically leave it blank on the inspection report? So maybe clarify some of that information.
Sure. So as one of the items that is actually excluded from a home inspection, just like we talked about with the wood boring insect inspection, pools, hot tubs, solar systems, there are ancillary systems in a house that are not covered under the home inspection standards. So we would basically just put a note in the report that says this is not something that we're inspecting, and we do recommend you follow up with a specialist in that particular area of expertise.
Great. And just a note on that, we do have pool companies to recommend to you on our website. Yeah. We have contractors in all different areas to help you through that process. Or of course, you could always reach out to Sue or myself for those types of questions. So how does a client benefit from a pre-sale inspection?
So when you say a client, we're talking about a home seller, I'm guessing, because there is benefit to both buyers and sellers in that regard. So with respect to the home seller, going in there and doing a pre-sale inspection, it's going to kind of give them a greater awareness of what is happening in their house and some of the things that they may be able to anticipate that would come up in a buyer's evaluation of the home. So there's a real benefit there. The other part of the benefit, of course, is in their ability to now make decisions as to how they approach that. They're now aware of something in their house. How do I want to deal with that? Do I want to disclose that? Do I want to have it repaired? How do I want to proceed with that? At that point in time, they remain in control of that conversation. So there is a lot of value in that regard. With respect to the benefit to a potential buyer, again, they may have the benefit of people doing things that may not have gotten done otherwise because the homeowner may not have been aware of it on there. And it also gives them some greater insights. They're still going to have their own home inspection, but now they have information from different sources. So there's a real value associated with that as well.
Thanks, Bill. And at a property that's connected to town sewer, do you offer an inspection of the sewer lines?
So, we've had that conversation over the years, and we kind of haven't taken a strong position on it. We are kind of leaning towards having a sewer scope program. That's something that is in current conversation, but right now it's not something that we do. If we have any level of concerns, and the level of concern that I'm thinking of is I'm approaching that 1940s house that has two huge maple trees in the front yard and the sidewalk is sunk. And I realized when I go in the house that that's the same location where the waste line is. And I noticed that the clean out cap for the waste line has either been replaced, is broken, or has been scarred by repeated removal. I think that that's enough information for me to recommend that somebody should take a look at that.
Thanks, Bill. That's all our questions for now.
Great. Okay, moving on. So we're going to just touch on very briefly these environmental areas, really not something that we're going to be able to focus on here at any great detail, but I do believe we have a radon seminar coming up next week. Sue?
Yes, next week. And we can send that invite out with our follow-up email.
So if you're interested in that, we can have a much more detailed conversation about that. Typically we would address the items that are on the left side of your screen. So as part of our extension of our service for home inspection, we would do radon air testing, we would do well water testing, we would do mold assessments. With respect to those things that we can provide services via subcontractor relationship, and Kara had mentioned, that we have on our website a contractor network. You can find asbestos, lead, septic, and underground fuel contractors as specialists in those areas, which we would encourage you to do. With regard to radon, we again, very basic here, folks. Radon is a gas. It's an inert gas. The EPA has said that when we have levels that are above 4.0 picocuries per liter in our houses, that we should undertake some mitigation to remove that. Radon is the second leading cause of the lung cancer in the United States. There are a variety of different products that can be used to do radon testing. We happen to have continuous monitors, and all of our environmental staff are NRPP certified, which is the National Radon Protocols Program for radon testing, because we believe that it's really important to be able to do it correctly. These are some illustrations of mitigation systems. The one on the left would be one that was added after the house was built. The one on the right would be an example of a system that would be new construction build out. With respect to the well water testing that we can do, there are standards to follow. With respect to radon and water, the state of Connecticut has adopted a guideline, which is not a federal standard, but a guideline that says that if you have levels that are above 5,000 picocuries per liter in the water, that you should have it mitigated. The average in Connecticut is about 3,000, and the state does recommend what's called dual vial testing. So you're doing 2 tests at once. The mitigation systems vary based on the levels of radon water that you have. So for low levels, you're talking about a carbon-based system, which is going to be, between $1,500 and $2,000. It does require maintenance, as does the bubbler systems, which would be used for systems, mitigation levels that are above 10,000 picocuries per liter in water. And again, you're going to be in the $4,000 to $6,000 neighborhood for that. All the systems are very effective. They're going to work well. Basic water profile, which is your bacteria, and then your 12 physical chemical characteristics, is just a standard profile that is really your starting point for waters. And then you can add on to that for pesticides, VOCs, arsenic, or uranium. And there are recommended intervals for all of those. With respect to a flow test, we do a flow test, which is not to be confused with a yield or a recovery test. Basically, those are tests that are much more invasive, but a flow test is a measurement of the water output over the course of an hour to look at how the equipment is operating and make some judgments as to the amount of water that it's putting out. This is a kind of a baseline evaluation, as are all of the water tests, to let people know if they need to do something further. And then basic mold assessments, of course, anywhere where you have water that's getting inside of a building or leaking inside of a building, or humidity levels that are not being controlled in a building, you have the potential to have mold inside of a house. Obviously, everybody has to make their own determination as to whether or not that's something that's important to them. Are they in a group of people that have, some type of immunocompromised system issues? They have a particular sensitivity or perhaps an allergy type situation, or maybe something has happened in the house before where, they were in the house and they saw something that was related to water or moisture control issues. And so you'd want to have somebody come do a mold assessment, take some air quality readings, potentially take some lift samples of suspected areas where there's mold, and then provide a report for that purpose. Examples of mold most commonly we see it up in attic areas, and we see it in basement areas. And then of course, any area where there's been a leak and potentially sheetrock, well, that's where you're going to be able to have those conditions. And then, as we mentioned earlier, these other specialized inspections would kind of fall into a subcontractor conversation. Asbestos materials, for example, you can find, hundreds of materials in buildings that could have asbestos in them. When we find them as home inspectors, because it is beyond the scope of our inspection, we're going to talk about suspected areas and we'll make a recommendation. We are not specifically looking for it, but frankly, if we come across it, we can't unsee it, right? So we're going to talk about it. One of the more recent conversations with asbestos has to do with vermiculite. Vermiculite, if you don't know it, is a granular insulation, most commonly found in attics, but it can be in the walls of houses as well. I would encourage you to go onto this website, which will be reiterated in the information that you get from us later, the Zonalite Attic Trust group. There is some class action lawsuit money that's been made available for folks. And I think you should, as real estate professionals, you should know about that if you don't already. With respect to lead, as you can see here, pretty much any house that's built prior to the late 70s, can have lead in it. And certainly, when we're going through a house, if we see any areas where we have any suspected concerns based on the age of the house and the condition of the paint, then we would speak to that. We don't really get involved in septic systems other than essentially we're running a lot of water in the house. If we do experience any slow drain situations or backups, or if we're out in the yard and we see any evidence of any breakout type conditions, then obviously we would refer you to a septic contractor. But we find, frankly, in most cases, that's already been dealt with by the time we get there. But we do have a list if needed on there. And then, of course, underground storage tanks. At this point in time, all of these environmental issues are becoming less of an issue as the years go by. But, 2 days ago, I was in a house and I found underground fuel tank lines in the basement. So you never really know what you're going to find. But there are state regulations with respect to that. And, again, we do have access to contractors on our network. Any questions that we have, Kara?
Yes. Do inspections for classic or older homes, antique homes, really differ? If so, can you do a class on this? We do have a class on this, so we can brush that up and may have that be one of our monthly seminars. I'll let Bill answer the first part.
We have a really good class on that, and you should attend it. Yeah. So listen, it takes special knowledge for a home inspector to be able to go through a house. I was in an 1829, very early Greek revival yesterday afternoon, had a great time with the clients, and we were there for several hours. So, yeah, you have to think about from the perspective of these old houses that were built before central heating, built before plumbing systems, built before electrical in the house. So it's very likely that there's going to be several vintages of any of those types of systems in the building. What did it take to get those systems in the building? Did the plumber cut out the beam that he wasn't supposed to cut out? And that's why you have the charming floors that you have now. So there's a whole bunch of those conversations that take place. They are, unique conversations. They do require some additional knowledge, and we do excel in those conversations. So we absolutely invite you to participate in those.
Thanks, Bill. You can go on.
Okay, great. A little quicker. Okay, so what does a home inspection cost? Well, it's really going to be a function of, the size of the house and the age of the house, the complexity of it, right? But, you're going to be between $500 and $700 typically. Again, is the wood boring insect going to be included or extra? And then you're going to have some optional testing prices that, again, we're giving you some ranges here that are going to vary from company to company. So you probably should do your due diligence on those conversations. Super important, especially now that people are really focused on the attendance part of the home inspection. We've always encouraged people to attend. We're going to be there for, as it says here, 2 to 4 hours, and you should be, ready to attend. We encourage people to participate. We encourage people to come with questions. We want it to be conversational. We want them to really walk away from this having a really great experience and saying, wow, I really learned a lot about the house today. We're still in COVID times here. So, I know it's exciting time for people and they want to have friends and family and all this stuff involved. We really still need to continue to try and minimize the amount of people that are on site. It's really important to be able to be comfortable and move through the house. Want to make sure that the inspector that you're dealing with or inspection company is licensed, insured. Insurance is not a requirement for the state of Connecticut, so it's important to ask those questions. Want to make sure that they're a full service company that has, a staff that's going to be knowledgeable to answer their questions, to be able to do their environmental tests where possible, and certainly those folks that are going to be adhering to the standards and are well experienced as well. As part of the follow-up today, you're going to receive some documentations. This one here talks about inspection day preparations. We have some guidance on the types of questions that clients may need to answer to be able to schedule an inspection. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll have the Connecticut standards in there as well. Our contact information is provided here, and we're certainly happy to help you in any way that we can. I am happy to answer any technical questions that you have at any time. Feel free to shoot me an email. I field lots of questions on a regular basis, and that's what I'm here for. I'm happy to do it. Any other?
Excellent. Thank you so much. Any more questions, anybody? Before we do the raffle, or I announced the raffle, we did it already. Our raffle is Leslie Pasquale. Did I say that correctly?
Okay.
Congratulations.
Leslie. Fantastic.
And I do have your email, Leslie, so I will go ahead and email you and get the information from you as to where I can send that. And lastly, I just want to mention we are going to go ahead and follow up on Bill, you ended the hold on.
You want me to reshare? I wanted to see everybody.
Okay.
I've been talking for an hour and I can't see anybody.
There we go. Okay. We're going to go ahead and follow up with an email, and that will include all the information that we talked about, including that radon seminar coming up next week. So look out for that email. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.